here to hear me speak. But first of all, I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time. And I also wanted to thank the entire Schneider family, who sort of different family members of yours helped me arrange this. And I just sort of wanted to highlight for a lot of the students that are here, just the fundamental importance of what we're doing here today, especially a time where we can't be physically together. And obviously it's hard to have mass events which we're all together. Just the importance of being able to hear your story is really an experience that we are all super grateful for. And I really can't thank you enough. And we know that within the Jewish tradition, people don't study history for history to be a dry academic endeavor. People study history to really make it be a part of their communal memory, and that to really influence the way that they live your life. And so we really appreciate it, Ms. Schneider, you taking the time for, talking to us, talking to the community, and talking to the students. And just one last word before we begin. If people do have questions, we're going to have some time for questions after. I just thought it would be a little bit easier to streamline it. And so if people either during the speech or after want to message questions to OC Hillel, and you can just private message it to me, I'll make sure that all the questions get asked after. I just don't want to, have a couple people talk at once or have people have their microphone not be able to hear. So without further ado, thank you so much, Mrs. Schneider. And again, message me your questions if you have them. Thank you so much.
Am I on now?
You're on.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eva Schneider. I was born in Slovakia, the Slovak part of Czechoslovakia. I am 97 years, I'm aging myself. I'm 87 years old, and I was a Holocaust survivor. I was a young child during the Holocaust, which for me started when I was in second grade. I came home from school one day and there was a knock on the door. Actually, there was a banging at the door, and SS soldiers appeared and told my parents that we had to vacate. We have 24 hours. We could not take anything but clothes with us. We couldn't take any furniture. We couldn't take any jewelry, no paintings from the wall, only personal clothing and personal belongings. I don't know how my parents managed, but we moved out the next day and moved into a furnished room in a lady's house. From that day on until the end of the war, my parents and I shared one room wherever we were, and I did not have any formal education from then on until I was 12 years old. I was homeschooled, sometimes by teachers, and sometimes, very often, only by my parents because we were on the run. We were in Slovakia until things became very difficult. At that point, we were smuggled to Budapest, to Hungary, where things were still quite acceptable for Jews. We lived there as Christians with false papers. My name was Kitty. Kitty Rats. I wore a cross around my neck. I could not go to school again. I was homeschooled there as well. We were there from 1942 until 1944. 1944, one day my father did not come home, and we learned that he had been arrested. At that point, it became untenable for us to stay in Budapest. So my mother was able to arrange for us to be smuggled back to Slovakia, to a little town called Nitra, where my uncle lived, and he had a connection that would be able to hide us. That connection turned out to be the director of a brewery, a Swiss man, a righteous Gentile. who took us up to the attic of this brewery. Now, mind you, the attic was a large space with sawdust on the floor, no beds, no bathroom facilities, no cooking facilities. My mother and I lived there for 3 months. Once a week, we would go down, we would be taken down during the night to this man's house where we had a warm meal and we had a shower. And a couple of hours later, we were taken back to the attic. We used one part of the attic to sleep in, and the other part, about 20, 30 feet away, we used as our bathroom, and whatever was there would be covered up with sawdust. We went down to his house one night, and the Hlinka Garda, which was the Slovak SS, came to the door because somebody had called them and told them that 2 Jewish women were at the house. And we were arrested, and I pled with one of the police, and I told him I was not Jewish. I cried. I begged him to let us go. And he made the classic remark that I live with to this day. He said, "Little girl, if you're Christian, we'll let go. If you're Jewish, you will have to suffer the consequences." The consequences were that we were apprehended. We were held in a large building with many, many other women. We were there for 2 or 3 weeks. Ultimately, we were made to march to the train station. We were put on cattle cars, and those cattle cars to Auschwitz. We arrived in Auschwitz on November 3rd, 1944, not knowing that 2 days before we came, some Jewish men had blown up a crematorium. And the day before we came to Auschwitz, they stopped gassing. Not knowing this, my mother on the cattle car prepared me for the end. She told me, "You know, it's not going to hurt. You just gotta breathe deeply." We got out of the cattle cars. We were marched to the crematoria. There were several. You knew they were crematoria because they had very, very tall chimneys. We were herded into a large room like a warehouse. We were made to take off all our clothes, down to absolutely everything. And we were marched in front of the SS soldiers, the guards, toward these very, very large steel doors that I assumed was the gas chamber. I was then 11 years old. My mother and I held each other's hand, and we were made to stop at a table where they gave us tattoos. They gave us a number. My mother went first to be sure she can tell me whether it was going to hurt or not. She got number 827077, and I got A27078. And my mother whispered to me, "Why are they giving us numbers if we're going to the gas chamber?" We walked a little bit further. Mind you, this is hundreds of women. We walked a little further where they shaved our heads. And my mother said, "Why would they shave our heads if we are going into the gas chamber?" And she said, "You know what? I think we're going to live. And the doors opened to what we felt was the gas chamber, and no gas came out. Water came out of the showers above us. At that point, it was bedlam. Everybody was crying. Everybody was screaming. We were herded back into the same room that we came out of with clothing all over the floor. My mother said, put on as many things as you can. It's very, very cold outside. So we got dressed, we grabbed whatever we could, more than one pair of pants, more than one skirt, more than one sweater, whatever we could find. And so began our experience in Auschwitz. I don't have to tell you too much about it because that's common knowledge and everybody has had the same experience. My mother and I were housed together. And one morning when we were outside being counted as you were every morning, they took my mother and a few other women and led them away. And I was an 11-year-old child left alone in Auschwitz. My mother and I did not want to admit earlier that we were mother and daughter because we were afraid that I, as a daughter, would be considered a young child and I would be killed. At any rate, I was crying. The women around me couldn't understand. It's just your sister that was taken away. They didn't know it was my mother. My mother was taken, I later found out, to Buchenwald on a work detail. I stayed in Auschwitz by myself. And at one point we knew that the Russians were coming. I mean, it got around the camp. And we just didn't know what was going to happen. They started evacuating people and they told us we are going to be taken to another camp. At that point, I had a choice of staying in Auschwitz as a child or going with the adults on the transport, which is now called the Death March. I was afraid to stay in Auschwitz because I still felt as a young child, sooner or later, maybe before the camp was liberated, they would kill us all. So I joined the women on the Death March, which was very, very difficult. This was in January. It was very cold, and we were literally herded. We couldn't stop. I once stopped to relieve myself, and I got the butt of somebody's rifle in my chin. So you didn't even dare stop for that. The women were together, and in front of the women was the transport of thousands of men prisoners. And I don't know why, but I felt that maybe if I go to the men, they will be able to carry me or they will be able to help me since I'm just a little girl. I somehow made myself walk faster through the crowd of women and I made it to the men. And there I noticed that the men, some of them, very few of them, had a little cart, a little wagon that they pulled with their possessions. I don't know what gave me the idea or the courage, but I approached one of the men and I said, I'm very tired. Could I ride on your cart? And he allowed me to ride on his cart. And that was the first thing that probably saved me because I don't think I could have made it. A very interesting thing happened while we were on this march, about 2 or 3 days into the march. a German soldier, a young SS man who was guarding us, walked up to me and gave me a little brown paper bag. He said, "Eat that, it will help you." It was a little bag of sugar. And I knew enough to ration that sugar. It lasted me the entire march. I think we're on the go for about a week. I would wet my fingers and get a little sugar from the bag. That was an act of kindness, very unexpected in the middle of hell. Ultimately, we were put into open cattle cars and taken to Mauthausen. Mauthausen turned out to be second only to Auschwitz. It had its own gas chambers, actually gas chambers on wheels, like a big van, and they would take it here and there, and that was kind of their killing machine. I was taken to Auschwitz on this train, all men around me. I was the only female. The people, the men in the open cattle car were very kind to me. They would lie on the floor and allow me to lie on top of them so I wouldn't have to lie on the very cold floor. They were mostly Poles and some Greeks. Whenever we got to a station, they would call, "We have a child here, we have a child here, give us some food." They never took the food from me, they shared. So I encountered many acts of kindnesses. We got to Mauthausen, which was very, very frightening. The first thing I saw was a pile of dead bodies. I would say 6, 8 feet high, 10 feet high maybe. And I'll never forget, there was one body of a young male with the eyes wide open, and that kind of stared at me as I was taken off the cattle car. In Mauthausen, as we exited the cattle cars, I met many other women. It seems that there were a group of Russian Christian women who also made it among the men. And I didn't even know that they were part of it. And they were partisans who were arrested and taken to Auschwitz. I was taken to a barracks, and my family were with me. I was able to find when we visited Mauthausen. It was a barracks that was for the ladies who were there for the soldiers' pleasure. And I was taken into their barracks and housed there for 3 days. On the second day, after I got there, I was taken to a doctor for examination. I was terribly frightened. Even my 11-year-old mind realized that I either was being examined so they would do experiments on me, or I was being examined in order to join the ladies. Fortunately, I spoke German. And again, I pled with this man, with the doctor. I said, "I'm only 11 years old. What do you want from me? Please let me go." And the miracle happened. He let me go. And I went back to the women I stayed with. And a day later, we were taken by bus to a subcamp called Lenzing. It was a subcamp of Mauthausen. We were housed there until May 5th, when we knew that the Allies were nearby, because we heard gunshots for days, and we saw some of our SS guards run and hide behind trees and change into civilian clothes. We were liberated on May 5th by American Third Army, who came. It was a Friday. The first thing I remember is we were at the bottom of a hill, and a little Jeep stopped at the top of the hill, and 3 soldiers came running down, and they said, "Anybody speak English?" And some women raised their hands, and he said, "You are free. The war is over." That was my liberation. It turned out that the camp Lenzing was very close to Salzburg in Austria. I was not in Germany. And we were taken to Salzburg to be rehabilitated. I weighed 52 pounds at liberation, had no hair, couldn't speak English, but I knew that I was free. We were kept there for about a month, at which point we were all repatriated to our hometowns. I was taken back to Bratislava. I was taken to a building where all those returning were registered. Walked up the stairs to the first landing. I didn't remember, by the way, what my parents looked like. I had completely, my past was erased. At any rate, I stopped on the landing and I saw a man who looked familiar. And I said to him, I said, "I am Eva Rosenbaum. Do I know you?" And he said, "Of course you do." Well, he turned out to be a very close friend of my father. We never registered me. He took me by the hand. We ran down the stairs, and he took me to my father's office. My father had survived in a Jesuit monastery in Budapest. He had hidden some money, I understand, in the shoulder pads of his suit, and he was able to buy off a doctor at the first prison that he was taken to, and he was released, and he found his way to a Jesuit monastery where he survived and was liberated when the Russians liberated Hungary. At any rate, my father came back to Bratislava. He had a male secretary who said that my father was at a restaurant having lunch. He ran to get my father. He told my father, "The young lady has come home. The young lady has come home." Well, I had a cousin who was 5 years older than I was, and my father was sure it was my cousin Susan, because nobody thought that I would make it. I did. And my father already had a letter from my mother that she survived and she was coming home. I was home. I found my parents about 2 weeks after I came home. I came down with a very high fever. I had typhoid fever. My intestines were perforated. A Catholic hospital was willing to take me because I was highly contagious. Nobody else would. And they nursed me back to health. And while I was there, the first 2-3 weeks, I was in a coma completely. And while I was in a coma, my mother came home. I woke up enough, I understand, to say, Mommy, you've come home. Now everything will be okay. And my family was together. And that was in the month of June. And in September, I went to school for the first time in 5 years. My parents were very wise. They had my tattoo was on the inside of my arm. They had my tattoo removed so that I would not every day be reminded. And they said, we have had a very, very horrible number of years. We have survived. Now go live your life and make the most of it. They were very positive people. I was never allowed to feel sorry for myself. Martyrdom did not exist in our family. And was it a horrible experience? It was absolutely awful. Everything you've read about Auschwitz is so. The slop we ate, the places where we slept, the outhouses we had to use, the beatings that we had to put up with, the torture that I've seen people go through. It was inhuman. It was something that you wonder that human beings can do this to other humans. But unfortunately, there are people who will do to others, whether it's the killing fields of Cambodia, where they beat people into the ground until they died, or whether it's what Hitler did to us. So I wear my Jewishness proudly. I think I have earned my place, as have my family. We lost more than 30 members of our family, cousins and brothers and young children. And I had one cousin who walked on crutches and he was taken to the gas chamber. I lost my grandparents to the gas chambers, but I have survived. And thank you for listening.
Ms. Schneider, thank you so much for that heart-wrenching story. I wanted to open it up for questions, reiterate what I said at the beginning, where there's a OC Hillel account, and it would be ideal. The first thing that I sort of wanted to ask you is, there's about 40 college students here.
I'm sorry, you know what? Let me get something. I'll be right back.
No worries.
I'm 87 years old and I wear hearing aids and I forgot to put them in.
No worries at all. If people have questions, now's a great time to send it to me. So again, don't send it to the account that I'm talking from right now. Send it to OC Hillel, just because I'm using a separate computer for it.
So yeah, I zoned out there for a second. Where do we send the questions to?
The OC Hillel
Send the questions to the OC Hillel account. So
please stay muted for the time
yeah.
being.
So
I'm back.
I wrote in the chat.
Are you going to watch an old lady put in her hearing aids? That will certainly help. Okay, go ahead. I can hear you now.
So I just wanted to reiterate on behalf of all of us how thankful we are for that truly inspiring and heart-wrenching story.
I'm good.
The first question, we have about 40 plus college students here, and I'm wondering on tonight's Yom Hashoah, I'm wondering if there's any particular pieces of advice or inspiration or just something that you don't want anyone here leaving tonight before they've heard.
Oh my goodness. You want positive thoughts or negative thoughts?
whichever you feel is
And
the
no,
most important.
I think I encountered kindnesses in hell, and I think some of those kindnesses helped me to survive. That's one thing. The other thing, and I always say that, don't, when you see young children, they are a lot smarter than you give them credit for, because at age 11, I knew enough to feed myself. I knew enough to steal blankets, to keep myself warm. I knew enough not to stay in Auschwitz because I was afraid that I was going to be killed. So at age 11, I had lots of, not the smarts, but I was just a normal 11-year-old, and 11-year-olds are a lot more capable than we give them credit for. Because I was 12 years old at liberation.
The next question that I got is, how did your story continue? How did you end up coming to America?
After the war, my father knew he didn't want to stay there because our country was under Russian occupation. And he had an opportunity. I mean, I had two uncles living in Chicago. My one uncle came out during World War I when my grandfather caught him playing billiards on Yom Kippur, and he had to leave. And so he came to the United States, and then my other uncle came out before the war, and they gave an affidavit to bring us to the United States. We had to wait 4 years, however, for our number to come up, and that's how we emigrated.
Have you ever been back to see any of the camps?
My family and I went back to Mauthausen, which is just a few hours outside of Vienna. It turns out that I was in an Austrian camp. I was never in Germany. My mother was in Germany, in Buchenwald, but I was in Mauthausen and Lenzing, which is in Austria. Yes, we have been back. It was a very, very moving experience, especially since I found the barracks, the very barracks that I was housed in.
Someone wanted to know how we deal with the rise of anti-Semitism today and the rise of neo-Nazis.
It is very, very frightening because apparently nobody has learned anything. You know, we always said never again, but never again is here again. And I don't think the Hitler era could never come back. But I think life for Jews is very difficult at this point, because whenever there are problems in a country, I still feel the Jews are the ones that are going to be blamed first.
What has your involvement in the Jewish community been for the last 50 or so years once you got to America?
I have not been active. We belong to synagogue. We observe at home. We observe kosher, and we observe holidays. And I have not been active in B'nai B'rith or in Jewish women's organizations at all.
Someone commented that you're extremely brave to share your story so openly, and they're wondering, is that something that took time, or is that something that sort of came naturally?
Well, I've done it all along in a little way, but at this point, there's so few of us left that I think those of us who have had the experience personally, I think we owe it to society to speak about it, because we were there, we saw it, we felt it, and many of us died there. So I think those of us who are survivors and are in our 80s and our 90s, I think we owe it to society to speak up.
And sort of in that vein, we got another question. What do you think is the most important for sort of the next generation of education about the Holocaust, when maybe the children of a lot of the people here will never have the chance to speak to somebody who had a firsthand account?
Well, I think we have a lot of testimony. I know I did the Steven Spielberg testimony at the Museum of Tolerance, and I did another one as well. So, you know, we're living where videos are available readily, and where people have in front of a video camera spoken and talked about their experiences. So that is the best that we can do. But I think it's important. It's important to keep the subject alive, because sadly, if you don't, then it could happen again.
We got 3 different questions on prayer and faith. So I'll try to summarize all the questions. What was your relationship to faith or prayer before, during, and then post your experience in the Holocaust?
I went to Jewish day school, so prayer was kind of part of my life. My father was quite observant, and prayer and my relationship with God is what saw me through. My mother and I prayed whenever we could, every day, every morning, every evening, and I think we had a feeling, that hope, that the Almighty will see us through. So having belief and praying is part of the deal. You don't make it without it. And I feel with all the things that I read about, whether it's atheists or whether it's agnostics, when the chips are down and it hurts and you're afraid, you're going to say, oh my God, help me.
Have you done any type of work with other Holocaust survivors?
No, I have not. I did not become involved in Holocaust studies or in giving talks until the last maybe 3-4 years, 5 years at the most, because again, I felt that I'm getting to an age where so few of us are here that we must speak up, but I did not do so before.
Someone else wanted to ask, they noted that a lot of Holocaust survivors ended up in Israel, and a lot obviously ended up in America, and sort of what your relationship to the state of Israel both was at the time of its founding and sort of has been throughout your life.
It's very interesting because I grew up in a household where Israel was not considered uppermost in everybody's mind. In other words, in our days, sadly, we were Jews by religion, and we were a part of the nation that we belonged to. And I think this must never happen again. I think Israel is terribly, terribly important, and Israel was the one refuge for Jews all over the world, and still is. So I'm a great supporter of and lover of Israel.
Someone else asked, in reference to the coronavirus, if the coronavirus has brought back feelings of fear and hope.
The coronavirus, I only say to my husband how lucky we are that we are doing the lockdown in a 4-bedroom house, because I remember being locked down in that attic with the sawdust on the floor, and we survived that too. So I think lockdown is, for me, it's not a problem at all. I think the virus, of course, is a tragedy, but being housebound when we were in hiding so very, very long is a no-brainer, as they say.
Someone else wanted to know if you've ever written a book or if there's any written material that sort of goes more in detail about your story.
And I have never, well, I have given some talks that were longer where I went into greater detail, but since you gave me 25 minutes, I cut it down to that. Well, there were, you know, there were many experiences. I divide my experiences in 3 parts. The first was before Auschwitz, which is the years when we were hiding and fleeing and running. And very few people have talked about those years, which were even longer. Then I speak about Auschwitz, and then Mauthausen was a whole new experience of its own. But yes, you know, there are many more details.
Would you mind talking just for 2 or 3 minutes about sort of the pre-Auschwitz experience that you alluded to?
Come again?
Would you mind talking for just 2 or 3 minutes about sort of that pre-Auschwitz period?
The pre-Auschwitz period is, it was a very frightening time because we were being persecuted, and wherever we were, Jews were being persecuted. And I saw from our apartment or from the room I was in, Jews being beaten in the streets. And we knew that we could lose it any minute. And my father was arrested because somebody, as they say, fingered him and said, "There goes a Jew." And so when you live, and we lived under these circumstances for years, and as a young child, I couldn't go to school. That was very difficult. And being in mortal danger for years is a very difficult way to live.
Someone wanted to ask on what you just said, when did you sort of really figure out what was going on in terms of just the extent of the horrors that was happening during the time?
Oh, I think I knew what was going on when they took our home and everything that my parents owned went. And I think I realized then that that I could not live a normal life, even as a young child, and that I couldn't go to school, and that my parents lost all their possessions, everything, from one minute to the next. And that is a very difficult thing. But you asked about details. My father had this male secretary who was not Jewish, of course. And I don't know when and how, but my father gave him a large box to keep should we come back after all this is over. And when we came back, the male secretary, Mr. Moskopf, had this box for my father. And what did the box contain? It contained my father's top hat, in which he was married, and thrown into the top hat were family pictures. So with my parents having lost everything, I have their wedding pictures, I have pictures of my grandparents, I have the family pictures, which is what we always say, if there is a fire, what do you grab first? The family pictures. And I have my parents' pictures because somehow my father was able to save those.
And before the war even started, how do you sort of remember your life before the earliest memories of war?
I was an only child living a very comfortable life. I had my friends, my girlfriends, and as I said, I was in a Jewish day school. When I was in second grade is when we had to vacate and run, and I never went back to that school. A very happy, comfortable life.
And then what was the process returning to school after those 5 terrible years? You said that you were liberated in June and you went back to school that September.
I was liberated in May. I was repatriated in June. And I went back to school in September, no questions asked. And I have a picture of my class. And I was then 12 years old. And I went to school there for 1 year. And we then waited for our quota in Switzerland. Not my parents were able to go out to Switzerland, and I went to school, to a French school in Switzerland, and we spent 4 years there waiting for our number, and then we came to the United States and we immigrated to New York.
And what was that?
There, the toughest thing was I spoke a little English, but I entered the last year of high school when we came to New York, and I had to take all these tests in English about English and American history that I had never heard about. So I had to really start from square one. It was a very, very tough year.
Going back to that first year that you returned to school, what was the experience like? Did people openly talk about what had just happened? Did people know? What was sort of your experience going in?
Nobody knew anything. There were two other Jewish girls in the class, and we knew what went on, but nobody else did. Nobody else knew, and we had to learn Russian because we were under Russian occupation. So I learned Russian, and I went back to normal classes. It's amazing that I think about it now, amazing that I was able to do that, but I did very, very naturally. My hair was very short because I came back with shaved head, so I just had whatever little hair there was that grew between May and September.
And someone else wanted to ask, how many languages do you speak?
I speak 5.
Wow. Another question, after the war, was there sort of just a natural, did you sort of have a natural reconnection with the Jewish community? Someone wanted to know specifically, did you ever have a bat mitzvah or anything?
No, I did not. I did not have a bat mitzvah, which I think in our area, girls did not have bat mitzvahs. That I learned about that when I came to the States. The boys had bar mitzvahs, but the girls didn't. And I chose to reconnect with my Judaism because when I first went to school, boarding school in Switzerland, I thought very seriously about choosing a different religion because I had gone through so much pain. And I went to church, several different denominations with my friends. There were 32 nationalities in our school, so it was a big mishmash, and you could experience a lot. And I went to Methodist church, I went to Catholic church, I went to a Presbyterian church, and after a few months, I decided that I wanted to go back to Judaism regardless. So I went back to my roots by choice, and have been a very committed Jew.
Just to follow up on that, on obviously a very different scale, one of the things that a lot of younger Jews today wrestle with is how connected they want to be with their own Judaism. And as someone who's obviously been through what you've been through, both in terms of your experiences in the camp and also how you just sort of described trying out different religions, what would you say to a young Jew who isn't really sure how connected they want to be with Judaism?
I think Judaism is the most basic of religions. I think, and my Christian friends and I have talked about that Judaism is the root and Christianity is the tree, but Judaism is the root. And I think, you know, when you read the Old Testament, I think it gives you a feeling of being grounded. Whether you read the Old Testament, whether you read the Torah, it is the first religion that civilized humanity. And Christianity grew out of it. I mean, Christ was born a Jew. And so I think we are the most of religions, and I think everything that followed was built on that base. I think, I don't know, I really think that if you observe Judaism, you can understand everything that followed.
Thank you so much. Just a couple more questions, and I want to respect your time here. Someone asked, what role do you think the Holocaust should play in contemporary Jewish life? And they specifically noted that a recent Pew survey, I think in 2013, said that that for American Jews, remembering the Holocaust is the most important thing for them in terms of their Jewish identity. And so they were sort of curious how you reflect on that, and just in general, where you think the place of the Holocaust within the American Jewish community should be.
I think the Holocaust was an event of such enormity, not just the numbers, but the evil and the atrocities. And we were completely powerless. You know, a lot of people say, well, why didn't the Jews fight back? You cannot fight back when everything is taken from you and you stand naked before whoever the perpetrator is. The Holocaust has to be studied. The Holocaust has to be remembered so that it must never, ever happen again. No people should ever be dehumanized the way we were, because we were not human beings during the time we were in captivity. Not just were we tortured, but nobody could claim humanity. I witnessed an SS soldier call over one of the prisoner women in Auschwitz and said, open your mouth, and he spit into her mouth just for his own amusement. When you witness things like that, and when you realize that people can do this to other humans, and you have to keep teaching it, you have to keep remembering it, and you have to teach your children and your children's children that this has happened and must never, ever, ever happen again.
Ms. Schneider, thank you so much. I'm wondering if you just have any final thoughts you'd like to share, any maybe pieces of advice for future generations, or really just, again, things to sort of underscore the importance of Yom Hashoah and Holocaust remembrance.
Well, I think, as I said before, I think remembering is important. Participating is important. Jewish identity is important. Let's not give that away. We have fought and suffered too much to lose it. And beyond that, just, continue to be hopeful. And in today's day, whether you're a Jew or not a Jew, keep healthy and keep safe, and believe that we'll overcome this as well, like we've overcome the Holocaust.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Schneider. We really appreciate you taking the time. It's truly been inspirational. So again, we really appreciate it.
A pleasure meeting you all.
Have a great night. And
you too.
Be safe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.